I'm Walter Isaacson of the Aspen Institute, and I'm sitting here with celebrated historian Joe Ellis, a Pulitzer Prize winner and one of the nation's leading scholars on American history. Joe, let us start at the very beginning of the Revolution. How did the Revolution begin in 1775?
Well, you're right. It's 75, not 76. It begins with a skirmish outside of Boston at Lexington and Concord between British troops and colonial militia. The bloodiest battle in the war is fought in June of 1775 at the Battle of Bunker Hill.
What were they fighting for then? Were they fighting for independence?
The Massachusetts people were fighting for their own independence because martial law had been declared in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or the colony then of Massachusetts, and they had troops stationed there. And so ahead of all the other colonies, Massachusetts believes that it needs to free itself of this ogre. And
well, so we're not really one country.
No, we're not.
Different colonies with different desires at this point.
They're different nation states even. They think of themselves as coherent, different. You know, when Jefferson was in the Continental Congress, he said he always wanted to go back to his country.
Which was Virginia. Well, let's look at this map here. So there really are these 13 colonies. Tell me how they differ in their economies.
Well, the big difference is if you look south of the Potomac and include Maryland into some of that, you demographically have an agrarian economy rooted in slavery. At 40% of the population of Virginia is slave, 60% of the population of South Carolina is slave. So if you were flying a plane, you know, you could manage this over the area from Maine all the way down to Georgia, it would look rocky and hard and cold, and then it would get in the middle colonies, it'd be an agrarian, a very wonderful, rich agrarian area, and then as you move south, sparse population, but increasingly African-American population.
Now, you're saying Massachusetts wanted to be free as a colony and be a free commonwealth, free from England. Did all of these colonies back then want that? Which ones were more in favor of rebellion?
The New England colonies rallied to the support of Massachusetts by sending troops in from New Hampshire, and Maine didn't exist then. It was part of Massachusetts. Connecticut did, but it was the rest of the colonies gathered and voted and support for Massachusetts, but totally political support, no military support at this time.
But then how does a Virginian, I guess he's a general by then, General Washington, how does he enter the picture?
He comes to the Continental Congress in May of 1775 wearing his military uniform. He's the only guy wearing a military uniform. So he's making some kind of
So Continental Congress is meeting where, in Philadelphia?
Yes. And he comes up from Mount Vernon. The last thing he says to his manager there, the plantation, is, when the British come to burn the plantation, get out Martha and my books, or my books and Martha, presumably Martha first. And he's pretty sure the war has started and independence is inevitable. But notice, this is 15 months before we get around to declaring independence.
So what happens, Washington gets to Philadelphia, what do? They have a Continental Army?
They say, you know, we're going to have to form an army to support the colonial position outside of Boston. Outside of Boston, the Boston militia have trapped the British Army in the city. There's 7,000 British soldiers under the command of General Howe, and there's like 14 or 15,000 militia surrounding the city. You go up and take command of that.
And make it into a Continental Army?
They don't call it that yet, okay? They don't call it that yet. They still don't get around to calling it that until the fall. But this is June. He goes up, he just misses Bunker Hill, but he takes over, and that's how the embryonic form of the Continental Army happens. Notice, you've got a Continental Army almost a year before you've got a war.
But you also have a Continental Congress. What do they mean by that?
I've wondered myself, Walter, where they got the Continental from, because obviously that's not something until you get to Manifest Destiny that you're looking at an entire continent, and we haven't had the Louisiana Purchase yet. It's their way of referring to everybody along the coastline up and down the continent, I think. And you notice they're almost all, you know.
So the Congress was people from the different colonies up and down the coast, but it wasn't really a national government. It was just a Continental Congress of these people who gathered together and tried to figure out how to support each other.
Correct. And they're fiercely independent of each other. They do think that they speak with different accents and they have different ethnic groups. It's sort of like a League of Nations. But once you get the war going, there is a strong pressure for them to come together and behave as if they were a national government.
And so the Continental Army actually is one of the things that makes it into a more united group of colonies.
That's right. And it's one of the reasons everybody suspected them. They worried about this.
And I guess it kind of helped that you had a Virginian doing it with a Massachusetts militia.
That's one of the reasons that Adams nominated Washington and needed a Virginian.
So how did they then decide that they were all going to hold hands and declare independence of Britain? Because they weren't really doing that in 1775. It's not until 1776 they decided that this is a war for independence.
And they make a plea to George III and the British ministry that they do everything possible to avoid war. And they make the offer, look, if you allow us to pass our own legislation and tax ourselves, we'll do that. And we'll stay within the empire, recognize the authority of the king, and remain within the economic side of the empire. If Britain had said yes to that, they would have discovered the British Commonwealth 100 years early. They said no to that.
And so then basically by June of 1776, and then culminating on July 4th of 1776, you have Adams, and then Franklin and Jefferson and others, people from Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, all agreeing.
What looked to be a radical group and a minority starts to become a majority. And there's a reason that happens. They're being invaded.
Right. Nothing
does it like they got 42,000
so
soldiers.
what unites the colonies is the fact that they're all being attacked now by England.
Great Britain has sent the largest amphibious fleet ever to cross the Atlantic, 42,000 troops, to invade Long Island and Manhattan.
And then they finally, by July 4th, have a declaration that this war is for independence, and that's something that we discuss in one of our other lessons.
All right.